This podcast is brought to you by the letters KYLT. All right, episode 3 of our conversations around the Golden Age of KYLT radio and top 40 music. And we'll continue that conversation with Keith Koprivica. Now, you may know him as Keith Miller from the KZOQ Morning Zoo. He was also a longtime account executive at KPAX TV, frequent voiceover talent, and for many years, he deplored you. Do you know what I'm going to say?
Yes, I do.
Not to what? Say
Don't you drive no wimpy truck.
That's exactly right. Thank you for indulging me, Mr. Koprivica.
Happy to
We'll
do
give
so.
a little bit of full transparency here. So Keith and I go back as long as, Vern and I did, and Fats and everything. But he's more than likely one of my very, very best friends. This isn't like we don't talk. We talk 3, 4, or 5 times a week. I have a 1-hour commute from North Phoenix to Tempe, Arizona, and Keith many mornings rides along with me through the magic of Bluetooth and cellular technology. So Keith, thank you so much for indulging me one more time this week. And let's talk KYLT. Let's talk radio. Let's talk about your journey from, back when you and I first started, and you were actually on the air at KGVO for a while before you even came over to KYLT, and showed me some ropes, and we had nothing but a great time. And it's been nothing but a barrel of laughs ever since. So I'm going to quit talking and let you, in fact, I'm going to step out and I want you to talk, and
see you, bye.
Text me when you're ready. Yeah.
Sure. No worries. I got to tell you, I love radio. I loved radio and I miss it.
Yep.
Yeah. There was just, I don't know, something about it. The creativity, the fun. It wasn't always a barrel of laughs. I mean, we all had our times, but the pranks we played, the fun we had. And I've been a radio lover since I was 3 years old. Remember I was probably 3 or 4 years old. My brother, Gary, 15 years older than me. And I still remember sitting there, and he had this little brown transistor radio, and I couldn't figure out where the music was coming from, and he told me there was a little guy inside the radio playing records. And that stands out to me.
That sounds like a big brother.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And then, heck, the first time I heard the Beatles, Hey Jude, was with my brother Skip. And living in Butte, and we had 2 AM radio stations. We had KXLF, that was more of the music station, KBOW, that was more of the news station. And so whenever a fire would break out in Butte, we'd tune into KBOW, and that happened often. And they would have this jingle that would come on, singing of when news breaks out, we break in, national award-winning news station, KBOW. And then the announcer would say, now let's go uptown to Steve Sevener, who's reporting live from the fire in uptown Butte. And Steve would come on and they'd say, there's gunfire that's just happening in Butte. The police are shooting the windows out of the medical arts building so the fire department can have access to the fire. And I would sit in my front yard on a lawn chair watching this fire and listening to the radio. And I guess that's
a really good point. Is? I think we all had in the 60s and 70s these little 999 transistor radios, and it was all AM. And for myself living in Missoula, it was KYLT, KGVO, and at the time KGMY. Right. They were kind of known as the bubblegum station, and KYLT was the rock station. When I came to Missoula to visit my brothers, they moved here to go to college and then married and stayed here. My brother Gary and his wife lived here, and I came down to visit one summer, probably 1970, 71. I can't remember the exact year, but we went to the fair. And KYLT was broadcasting live out of a little truck that was a converted postal service van. And I remember looking through the windows of this guy playing records back in there. And I'll never forget that. And later realized what it was. It was KYLT's old live van that later some of the equipment was taken out of there and was used as to go and play parties at DJ services. The old turntables. That's exactly right. And Argo in episode 1 talked about that, and what a moneymaker it was and how popular it was in Missoula at that time. So yeah, and I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I know you actually had your own DJ service when you were on the air.
I did, yeah. Cop Dog Mobile Music Service. There's an old business card right there. That's what it looked like. Played a lot of weddings. Used to play the elbow room on the old double wide all the time. So that's that's how I supplemented my income, is to go and do parties. I bought my own equipment and ran that for a long time. Even after I left the radio station and went to television, I still had that mobile music service for a long time.
I think that's one of the hallmarks of people in radio. A lot of them have 1, 2, 3 jobs, and they just kind of find a way to make ends meet and look for really good opportunities. So yeah, no, well done. So when does that seed that was planted as a 3-year-old, when does that start to grow, and when do you put on a pair of headphones and talk into a microphone?
I remember wanting to be a DJ back when I was in middle school. There was an FM station that was signed on by the students up at Montana Tech, KMSM-FM, and one of my classmates' dad was a professor, and he became a DJ on that radio station. But at that time, you had to have a radio operator's license, which meant you went through a test and had to go through some study sessions, and I just didn't have that opportunity, so I couldn't be a DJ. But I'd stay up on the weekends and listen to it and call in right until midnight when they signed off. It operated about 9 hours a day, all on volunteer time. And actually, ironically, when I went back for a couple of summers to Butte, I went up and did a few board shifts there just because it just kind of felt the way, kind of cool to do. They gave you a key to the building and said, go and sign on the radio station, work as long as you want, and then sign it off when you're done.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And you could bring it and play anything you wanted. Bring your own records. They had a whole library of records there. But KMSM-FM is maybe where I got the bug when I was young and listening. I came to Missoula and I flunked out of business school rapidly, about 4 quarters in or 5 quarters in, because I was not a business student. Yeah. And so I had taken a beginning radio television class and kind of thought it was pretty cool. And I took a journey over to, I went and visited with the chairman of the business school, and she said, I wish you luck, sir. Signed off on it. If I could go and get readmitted by another school, she was okay with it. Went over and knocked on the door of a guy named Greg MacDonald, and I had never met Greg before. And I told him my situation, told him I wanted to try it. He said, I have no reason why not to. He allowed me to be readmitted in radio TV. And from then on, I loved it. Schooling got easier and better, and I'm still very close friends with Greg to this day.
Yeah, I'll jump in there and say that Greg is one of my favorite people as well. Had him as a professor at the University of Montana, wrapping up my RTV degree, and just such a class act, and just so intelligent and kind. He's the real deal. So, we were fortunate to have Mr. McDonald. I'm sure he doesn't want to be called Mr., but that's okay, Greg. I'm sure you'll get over it. So you come to Missoula, you're in school. You must need to support yourself. How do you support yourself? I would imagine you start knocking on doors of radio stations.
First thing I did actually was I volunteered at KUFM. Did some late evening board shifts. There's a guy named Brian Morger, who's now a famous artist in Great Falls. He lived on my dorm floor, and he told me I should use the name Keith Miller, so that's where that came from. So I did some volunteer board shifts on KUFM during National Pledge Week. I brought a live band up called Surfer Ruth, and they played in the studio. And funny, that recording later ended up on an album that was put together by someone, I believe it was up in the Havre area or up on the High Line of Montana, just collecting old Montana music. And he's done a series of albums, and that's available online. You could hear all of my terrible announcing, but the band was great. That was young. So then eventually I wanted to, like you said, support myself. Well, first thing happened was I went back to Butte for a couple of summers to drive beer truck. And about the third summer back to Butte during college, I was an intern at KXLF TV. There they had me doing the Tonight On, so I would That's where you say tonight on KPAX or tonight on KXLF-TV at 7 o'clock, it's blah, blah, blah. The general manager of the radio station or the TV station, KXLF, did not like KXLF radio, which was in the same building but operated by a different general manager. And so I went and hustled up some weekend work on KXLF radio. A guy named Bo Stone hired me. He was an old famous DJ in Butte. And the general manager of the TV station said, I don't want your voice on my TV station and on that radio station. And I said, well, that's easily solved. You're not paying me and they are. So I stuck with radio. And
sir, you've made it an easy decision.
That's right. So then I came back to Missoula, started visiting with a classmate her name was Heidi Tauber, one of the best female announcers I've ever heard. Heidi, unfortunately, has passed away, but Heidi was doing afternoons on KGVO, which was a country station, and they needed a 7 to midnight announcer. And I went in and interviewed, and I got the job. And I stayed there about probably 9 months, and just wasn't the right fit for me. At that time, I wasn't much of a country music fan. I still remember the first day on the air calling a song that was David Frizzell and Shelley West. And David Frizzell's dad, Lefty Frizzell, was a famous country star, and I mispronounced his last name. So that was probably why I needed to move on. So I went and saw Vern Margo. I had talked to him before, and Vern hired me part-time, and I was doing weekends. And then they encouraged me to come in and do like an hour every afternoon of reading the news live, because Ray had been there since early in the morning. And so I was coming in and doing news live on KYLT. And then I went on spring break. His friend and I were gone, and I decided I needed to be gone a little bit longer. So I called Vern to tell him I wasn't going to be back for that weekend shift I was supposed to work. And he said, okay, fine. Vern's own voice, Bill Schwanke quit, so you're going to need to come in and start doing sports when you get back here. Okay. So then I was doing sports in the morning until they hired Tom Morris, and then Tom came in as the sports director and the announcer, and I was able to move into doing some sideline reporting for Grizz games, continuing part-time on KYLT. Then the 6 to midnight or 7 to midnight shift came available, and Vern came to me and asked if I wanted to be on. And I said, absolutely. So I was still in school at the time, full-time as a student, and was on evenings on KYLT for, Scott, I can't remember how long. But at one point, they had hired a new sales manager at this radio station. His name was Dave Self. He was from Lewiston, Idaho. Dave and I got along very well. And Dave liked how I sounded on the air. Well, there was going to be a book coming up. The book is the ratings book, and they would do a ratings book once a year. And at that time, what they called the FM, KZOQ, was automated in the midday shift. They had a live morning announcer, live afternoon announcer. The middays was automated, and then evenings, I think, may have been automated. I can't remember. But they came to me and said, would you be willing to do middays? And I was still in school. I was only had one class left. It was a 5-credit beginning sociology class that I had to take to get the rest of my credits I needed. And so I said, sure. So I was doing middays on KZOQ and then nights on KYLT and going to school. But school kind of took the least importance. I went and took the first test. I did well in the test, and I decided I would just go and show up for the next midterm. And I showed up, and the professor changed the date on the midterm, and he was handing out the completed tests. And I needed the credits to graduate. And I was on the air doing 2 board shifts. So I went and sat with him in the office and explained my situation, told him I was already working full-time in my field, asked if I could take the test. He allowed me to do so, and I passed the course and graduated from the University of Montana on the 7-year plan, and then was moved full-time to KZOQ, of which I did middays for a while, and then was moved to the morning show. So
I'm gonna interrupt you just for a quick second there, because I had forgotten. So you were doing a shift on a KZOQ afternoons, let's call it, or middays,
right,
and then coming back and doing the night shift on KYLT.
Right. Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I guess I'd forgotten about that. And, for anybody that's ever done an air shift, yes, radio is super fun. It's super exciting. It can also be exceptionally boring because you're playing a lot of music. It's very intensive music. And so you're spending what, 10 hours a day playing
Yeah.
records?
Yeah. And yeah. And,
Wow,
at
good for
that
you.
time, you talk about playing records. This is what we were playing on KYLT at the time. It's a 45. And it's probably one that you'd
Yep.
like. Ambrosia, How Much I Feel.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, you remember that.
Uh,
Anyway,
that may
that's
have been on our playlist
I think
last
it
night.
was.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was. And it was funny. We'd have little bins, and you'd play the record, and then slip it under the bottom of the other record, so you had the rotation. There was a clock sitting up on the board that you had to follow and play. The hot song first, coming out of the top of the hour, and then into the whole programming went, and you had to follow it, or Vern would not be happy with you.
Yeah. Argo didn't sleep much.
I
Seemed
know.
like he, if you went out of sequence or played something that he damn well knew wasn't supposed to be played, he would call and, "What are you doing?"
Well,
So
I
yeah,
distinctly remember
yeah,
Hank
ton of
Williams
fun.
Jr. played a concert in Missoula, and the next morning a guy called and said he was Hank Williams Jr.'s guitar player, and they were headed out on the bus and asked if I could play a certain song that was in the AM rotation, but it wasn't in KZOQ. And that's what I was doing mornings. And it was early. It was 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning. And I ran over to the other side, grabbed the record, played it, and pretty soon here comes Vern in, walking into the studio, so chewed my what. And it's like, come on, Vern. But yeah, he didn't let you get away with much.
Dad was always listening.
Man.
Always. Yeah.
Oh man.
And we'll sit here and talk a little bit about Vern, but I'll tell you, Vern Argo was a very class individual, had just a wonderful time with that friendship and working for Vern. And I'm sure that he appreciated everything, you did. I mean, my goodness, 10 hours a day or whatever it was, pulling 2 shifts. So at some point, they decided to get you out of bed early in the morning.
Yes, sir, they did. And I think for about 2.5 years, did mornings. You tried it with me for a while. That didn't last very long. What, we got you in there for a week?
Yeah, it could have been fun, but I couldn't get out of bed, which is ironic as I'll get out now because I get up about 3:30, 4 o'clock every morning, thanks to my cat. So,
yeah.
But
heck, I was 25 years old back then. And so, you didn't have to operate on a lot of sleep. And yeah, I still remember driving in and on a beautiful spring or summer morning in Missoula and getting ready to go on the air. I'd try and get there by 5 a.m. And there was just something special about waking people up in the morning in Missoula.
Yeah, you had, I think you were able to take KZOQ to that first next level with the Z100 or the KZOQ Morning Zoo. I mean, you had some great audio bits and drops from, I think it was ACN, American Comedy Network.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, that was a time during radio's evolution where there was a lot of morning zoos. And you held your own you could have taken that show to any market in the U.S., but, fortunate enough, we were lucky to have you in Missoula. So, talk about some of your memories, maybe of doing mornings for a couple of years.
Well, I appreciate what you're saying. I don't necessarily agree that I could have taken it to any market. I was a small market guy. And, you hear guys come into Missoula like Craig Johnson, and there was another level. That guy he was the real deal. And I was young and immature at the time. I didn't have the maturity that to put a real radio show on the air. But I had a hell of a lot of fun. I did try to prepare. I talked a lot about current events, just thinking, so when I started on KZOQ, we were in the Fairway Shopping Center, and that was where you sat down. There was a sit-down console, and the door was off to the left, and then there was a big rack that had all the carts. And the carts looked like an 8-track tape, and that's where the commercials were played on, and a few songs. And you really couldn't see the door when you were sitting down. And I know that this happened often with announcers someone would be on the air and someone would get down on their hands and knees and crawl underneath and grab their leg as they're on the air. And that was a great prank that was played. You know what was really weird in the Fairway Shopping Center? And I did one overnight shift the entire time I was ever there. And that door to the studio never got locked, or at least I don't even recall that there was a key. Maybe there was, but I still remember somebody coming in the middle of the night. I knew who he was. He was friends with another announcer. He came in, he was kind of all strung out, and he set a bullet on the counter. And I just was like, but he eventually left. And today, can you imagine not having a locked door at a radio station? It just wouldn't happen.
No.
But, people would come in and visit us all the time. And that's what was important, is able to, almost be friends with the public.
100%. Yeah, a lot of people would call up and, you did want to talk to you. That was the voice that they couldn't, the face that they couldn't see, but they loved the voice, or they enjoyed the voice. And a lot of people, we have some great memories of people that befriended us.
Right. That's right.
One of my, and I still remember the sinking feeling finding out that you were leaving the station, because, we had been close but we were happy for you. It was probably at the time the right career move. You decided to move to as an account executive at KPAX, and you did very well with that. But walk through, some of that decision. And, I don't know that you and I have ever really talked too much about it, other than you were like, "Hey, Coleman, see you around."
It was all about money. Unfortunately, it was really difficult at that time to make it on the income that I was making in radio. I could barely make my rent payment. I had an old truck. If something would have happened to the truck, I wouldn't have had the money to fix it. I'd have had to call mom and dad. And at that time, it's like, I don't want to do that. So I'd been doing some part-time announcing over at KPAX. They would have me come in and just cut some commercials periodically. And when I was over there, I talked to their sales manager, and we ended up visiting a few times, and I encouraged him to give me an opportunity. And he had told me that they may be adding a third position. And one day I got a call, and he said, "The sales team wants to talk to you." And so I wasn't dressed for success. I was in jeans. I had just gotten off the air, and I went over and sat down and talked with the rest of the sales team. What they were doing is kind of just to make sure that I would fit in with the team interview. And then I got another call from him, and he said, "You are the new account executive." And I said, "Well, don't tell anybody, because I need to tell my boss first." And he said, "Well, you better hurry, because everybody knows it." And so that was a weird situation. I had to go in and tell Vern that I was done in 2 weeks. And it was not anything I prepared for. Walked into his office, told him what was up, and he was very cool about it. And 2 weeks later, I signed off and went to work at KPAX. I still remember the last song I played, "Rockin' Down the Highway" by the Doobies.
I don't know if there's an more appropriate song than that.
Yeah. You were in the studio with me that morning. You came in and hung out for quite a while.
Did I?
Yeah, you did.
Was I sober?
I don't know. But you were there for quite a while, which was an honor.
I do not remember that. I don't remember that, but it doesn't surprise me. Like I said, I was exceptionally sad that you were moving on, but happy for you.
Well, thanks.
I've told this story to a lot of people. I'm sure I've mentioned it to you too, but one of the very cool things that you and I got to experience as friends, and not many friends get a chance to do this, but that's to live next door to each other. So you were living over in the Wapakia area, and made a comment to me that the house next door, or across the street actually, was coming up for sale. And I was able to buy that with my girls. And so we lived across the street from each other for what? 3 years?
I think
4
so.
years?
I've got
And the
that
shenanigans and the hijinks.
Yeah, the shenanigans. When I would be sitting watching TV at 8:00 at night, and all of a sudden a huge snowball would go bam on the picture window in my living room, and I'd come out of my shoes, and it was guess who across the
I think
street.
I was returning that from earlier.
No, I don't think so. I distinctly remember a big snowstorm, and I distinctly remember a pile of snow in my driveway about 6 feet tall when I came home. I couldn't get into the driveway, and I
Hmm.
don't know who ever did that. And then when I threatened to get my hose out and ice up your snow, you begged me not to. In fact, you didn't beg me, you threatened me not to.
Yeah. Yeah, and my threats go so far with you.
They do.
Nice try, though. Yeah.
And I still have that photo, which we'll pass on to you, of you mowing the grass across the road in your nice looking shorts.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah,
Late 90s high
that's right.
fashion, peak
You bet.
fashion.
You bet.
Yep. Um, let's go back a second to, we were talking a little bit about how you supported yourself through school
Mhm.
and, like, again, a lot of us, a couple of jobs. And I think, keep me honest here, but weren't you involved with ASUM and some of the programming around the concerts at the University of Montana?
I was. Actually, I was an RA too. I was an RA
Okay.
in Aberhall for a year, which
Did you
enabled
give
me.
blood and sell your blood too? I mean,
Sure.
what the hell didn't you do?
Well, I remember when I first came to Missoula, I worked a couple times unloading trucks for 2J's Produce, and
Oh my
we would go
gosh.
over at night and unload the trucks. But no, I was an RA in the dorms. The year before I was an RA, I was the films coordinator at ASUM programming. Brought in some films that a lot of people didn't like because they were commercially successful films. We had probably the biggest grossing film of the program up to that date anyway. I don't even know so much that they do that anymore. Then I applied for, did not get the pop concerts coordinator job, and that was the job that he actually did the booking for the concerts, but I got the house manager's job, and I hired all of the security for all of the concerts and all of the performing arts events, and we did some big shows. We did ZZ Top and Huey Lewis and the News, and I mean, I've got a whole bunch of different backstage passes still that I'd be happy to. Kenny Rogers, that was a huge show. And the average age, this is a funny story. So the average age of the participants or the audience there was probably 70 years old, 65 years old. Kenny had a demographic, an older demographic. And he performed in the rounds, so right in the middle of the field house. And Kenny had 4 security guards that were dressed in sport coats, cowboy hats, had their earpieces in and their little microphones sticking out of their sleeves like they were Secret Service. And I had to provide them with, I believe, 8 of my people to walk Kenny out of his dressing room and into the arena. And then they had to surround the stage. And then Kenny's guys surrounded my people. They acted like it was going to be a mad rush, and it would have had to have been people rushing the stage with walkers. And a good friend of mine was one of the people that I provided to be surrounding the stage. To this day, he won't listen to Kenny Rogers music because he was so appalled with the way that they acted. But one other funny story: I was working at KZOQ or KYLT at the time. Well, I was also a house manager at ASUM, and a certain concert was booked, and KZOQ, KYLT were supposed to be welcoming stations. And something happened, and they weren't going to be welcoming stations. So Vern, in the way that he did things, decided he was going to pull all the music from this artist, and he yanked all of their music in. This was a very, very hot artist at the time. And so I'm in between kind of a rock and a hard spot. I'm in ASUM's office, and they are just going off on the radio station. And I speak up and I say, well, hey, they were promised to be the welcoming station, and then they got it pulled. Well, then, boy, I was the ugly guy for a while. But they decided to allow KZOQ and KYLT to be the welcoming stations. We did the show, and it was a huge hit. And we won't say who it was.
I'm going to want to know after we finish this up. That's really interesting. That story is not exclusive. I think there's a lot of stories out there like that in radio in general.
Mm-hmm.
I was on the air in Billings on the FM there, but they had a massive, it was a monster AM station. And same thing where the PD/music director got upside down with Garth Brooks and they pulled one of his songs and the song did not make the number one song for the nation that week because the
Boy.
station had dropped it. They, just flexing some muscle and some
Yeah.
stations had the ability to do that. And, I talked to Argo a little bit about choosing music and everything, and he kind of downplayed it a little bit, but Vern Argo was very well respected around, in the music circles for his ability he had a great ear, picking a lot of massive hits.
Well, KZOQ was like the smallest market reporting station to radio and records, and the only reporter in Montana. And Vern was so well respected as a program director. That's why we got so much music. You remember the old great album giveaways where Vern would bring out all the extra promo albums, sit them down in the Jocks Lounge in the Fairway Center, and we could have our pick of music. That's why we had so many albums and records.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Do I remember that? I'll never forget that. I mean, it was just, I don't want to exaggerate, but hundreds, if not 1,000 albums at a time. They would give him so many, different copies of them.
That's right.
And he was so generous with, one, I need to get it out of my office or out of the music. Didn't he have a locked up music like a cabinet or a closet
There was a closet
in the fairway? Is that right?
It was a closet. It was back behind the little studio where Ray did his news. So you walk back
Right.
past
Yep.
and
Yep.
when we moved from the fairway to Regent Street, Vern cleaned the closet out. And we got stuff. I got so many records. I got old Beatles 45s. They were beat to hell, but I got some really cool stuff. And then moving to Regent Street, Vern and I moved the studio that morning. So I showed up early. We signed KZOQ off the air, pulled the antenna off of the roof, took it over to Regent Street, put the antenna up, and signed it on over in Regent Street. And I signed on there for the first time and went on the air with the new studio.
Yeah. And there's something just magical about signing a station on for the first time as well. I mean, everything's brand new. Usually everything pops. It's a great sound.
And,
So,
Vern was so cool. When we set up that studio at Regent Street, he asked me to come in and tell him where I wanted all of the equipment to make it easiest for me to operate. And that makes so much sense. It made it so that the users could make it work best.
Yep. 100%. So let's talk a little bit about K-Pax and, your advertising campaign with with Chevy trucks and Don't You Drive No Wimpy Truck. Because that campaign went on for quite a while.
It did.
And keep me honest again here, I think you won some awards for that.
I think it won some sort of a statewide Addy Award, or I can't recall exactly what it was. Created that because Carl Tyler Chevrolet was looking for something different, and actually we were watching these ads that were sent to them. Somebody wanted to sell them a package of ads about don't you drive no ugly truck. And so we created don't you buy no wimpy truck. It was kind of that's where we got the idea. But then we came up with all of the different ads. That's really what made it. I mean, the wimpy truck is, people still remember it to this day. Just the other day, I had somebody say, "You look really familiar. How do I know you?" And I'm thinking, that was me that did the Chevy truck. And I'll tell people that. Oh, yeah, I remember you. And periodically somebody will just come up to me and say, "Hey, you're the wimpy truck guy." I don't know. For some reason, it caught on. You get lucky in advertising and it catches on. And pretty soon you are, you have a winning campaign. And it did. It went on for a long time, probably 8 or 10 years. And, Carl Tyler's still a good friend of mine. Carl is a class act. He and Jerry Joseph were the general manager out there. And I had such a good relationship with them.
I can believe that. Absolutely. I know that, you go way back with Carl, and I think you both treated each other very well and very professional. And there was a great friendship there as well. So,
I said I still talk to Carl periodically.
That's awesome.
He sold his dealership about a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. and he's just spending his time full time at his ranch in Leadore, Idaho, or down in the Phoenix area. He's got a ranch down there as well. Back when we were still doing the Wimpy Truck ads, he allowed me to come down to his ranch in Leadore in the fall and get on a horse. And I'm not a very good horseman, but we rode up into the mountains and brought cattle out. And then we got to separate out the calves from the heifers. And it was just a really cool experience hanging with Carl for 2 or 3 days. But those are the kinds of relationships you develop.
Absolutely. It seemed like radio and TV just kind of lent itself to great relationships. So
You bet.
So you're at K-Pax, but I think it's partially because it's in your blood. You just don't want to do one job. So you hooked up with your buddies, and I think that the relationship probably came from selling advertising to electronic sound and percussion. But the Bopadips, you worked with the band for quite a while, and they're well known throughout Missoula and Western Montana. Tell us a little bit about that experience.
Actually, I signed on with the Bopadips before I left the radio station. I was still
Okay.
working in radio, and there was a guy named Stubby who was a bartender over at the Squire's Pub, and Stubby was doing sound for the Bopadips. So he hit me up one day to come over and videotape the Bopadips when they were playing at Park Place, and he said they'd run a tab for me. And so I went and shot some video, and they had an old cheap little video camera and had a few drinks, and they enjoyed it. And I had known Dave a little bit because Dave McIntosh, because I had bought my PA system from him when I did the DJ service. And
Oh, yeah.
so we got to visiting, and then Stubby called me one day and said, "You want to be a roadie?" And I said, "Well, I'll give it a try." So the first gig out was Spokane, Washington. Never forget it. Helped them load in. They were driving at that time like an old Ford van that was packed to the rafters with gear. And we went to Spokane and played, and I was kind of having fun. So I continued on, and we had over the years, they decided that I would be better fit for them to also be their booking manager. So I booked all the gigs for quite some time, kind of acted as road manager, if you will, where once we showed up, I made sure that the hotel rooms were ready, the stage was ready, talked to the buyers who referred to them. And we played all over the country. We flew to Florida and played for 3 nights, opened a nightclub, played in California at the Good Guys Car Show, out in the Seattle area at the Good Guys Car Show. And then we drove a lot too. I think I saw almost every town in Montana at least once, all over the Pacific Northwest. That was 19 years of road work. And over the years, I also bought my own lighting equipment. So I did lighting for them, and I owned all the lighting gear. And finally, Checkers and T decided they were going to leave the band. And that was, I believe, in 2001 or 2002. New Year's Eve of 2001, I think, was their last gig. And then later that year, I decided I was going to leave. But we still remain good friends. Unfortunately, we lost Greg Carter this year.
Yep.
So,
yeah, rest in peace, Greg. He was
amen.
Class act and a gentleman, very well known, not only as a Bopadip, but as a businessman in Missoula. So a lot of people know Greg.
Greg was one of the most amazing frontmen I've ever seen in a band. He could command a crowd like nothing else. And you could see it in his eyes. When something was going to happen, you'd see it in his eyes. Some of the stuff that happened on the road with us was just hilarious. We always entertained ourselves after a gig. We were still up and wide awake. And so we'd go back to the hotel room, and Checkers would fold his eyelids inside out and put toothpaste in his mouth and come out and do Night of the Living Dead. And then Greg and T would get their underwear on and pull it up in the crack of their butts and pull their shirts up and do belly bucking, and they'd call it sumo. And everybody would laugh. Then the best one ever, we were playing in Kalispell at the Outlaw Inn, and Lee Mandelko was our sound man, but he'd only been with the band a while, and he was very quiet, and nobody expected it. And he kind of disappeared out of the hotel room, and all of a sudden the door flies open, and it's Lee buck naked with some toilet paper hanging out of the crack of his rear end on fire, running around yelling, screaming hemorrhoids.
My God.
And those are the kinds of things that really made it We laughed so hard. It just the same as with radio, buddy. You develop that friendship and that brotherhood.
Yes, that's a different podcast, but wow, what some great stories. So I can see why you did it for 19 years. I mean, if you even only had one of those episodes every year, it'd be worth it just to hang out for that one time. But something tells me it was each and every time you left Missoula County.
Well, we were
Or maybe
playing
you
at the
didn't even leave Missoula County.
oh, yeah, sometimes, maybe not. We were playing at the Cat's Paw in Bozeman, and the place was
Yeah.
packed. The owner came in, and Greg had the crowd just going nuts, and I still remember the look on the owner's face, just like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. I mean, the place was just going nuts, and Greg had that ability. We used to play a Bobcat booster party every year out at the fairgrounds, and when we'd get down, it was just in a big open building, we'd have a duct tape fight. We'd roll up all the duct tape we used for cords and throw it at each other like snowballs. Except it hurt a hell of a lot more to get hit by a wad of duct tape. I think I whacked
Yeah.
Checkers in the head one time, and he just about knocked him out.
Checkers.
I know.
Come on, he's trying to keep
was,
the beat.
Checkers was our drummer.
Yep, that's fantastic. So, I think you've been retired for a few years
I
now.
have.
What's that like? What do you
It's boring at times.
tell us what keeps you busy?
Gardening. Love to garden, grow my tomatoes and my peppers, flowers, talk to you every morning almost on your way to work. Just bought a new Mac computer and I'm going to start doing some more voiceover work. And I have about 5 shoe boxes full of these. And they're my old air check. And I'm going to try and start digitizing them. And one goal I have in mind is to take as many. What would happen is the air checks, that's the recording of our air show, of our board show, our air show. When you turn the microphone on, the cassette would start to record. And so we have blips and pieces of old ads from Missoula on my air check. And what I'd like to do is put together a montage of as many old Missoula ads of businesses, especially those that are gone. And I think that would be pretty spectacular. I know that I've got one that says, Sound West sounds good. And there's hopefully one that says the TPS Trading Post Saloon, Missoula's hottest hotspot. That, of course, being Fat Dad.
Yep. We're looking forward to the conversation with Fats, and hopefully we'll get him to do those taglines again. But yeah, you look at Facebook occasionally and you'll see pictures of Missoula days gone by, and menus from the Village Inn Pizza or the Heidel House and things like that. But to be able to see or actually listen to some of these old ads that I know are on all these old air checks that we have. So I'm going to hold you to that. Going to make sure you do that. Don't make me come up to Missoula because you will anyway. But
yeah, I will anyway. I'd like to see you more. But no, I think it's important. And KYLT was awful important in a lot of people's lives in this community. Back when radio was important, radio isn't so important anymore because, hey, let's be honest, with podcasts and streaming, you can hear whatever you want when you want. It's just a whole different world. But there's still people our age that remember the golden years of KYLT.
KYLT was, it was a huge piece of us, of our background. We've talked a little bit about, and I've talked with Argo about this with, the Big 30 Countdown and the hot air balloon. You made a comment about something that I had forgotten about, and that was broadcasting from the Western Montana Fair.
Absolutely.
I think you and I both did that for years. I'd forgotten about it, but that was always fun. And, to broadcast from the fairgrounds, but also, when we were younger and you would walk up to that and see Fats or see Peter Christian and Rod Harcel and even occasionally Argo. And these are the voices that, we have, what do we have? 9 stations in Missoula.
Yeah.
And KYLT had 90% of that.
Boy.
So these guys were complete. I mean, they were famous.
You mentioned Rod Harcel. He was doing 6 to 10 or 6 to midnight on KYLT under Rod
It was
King.
amazing.
Yeah. And
Rod King.
I remember being in college and going down, just like, before I ever worked in radio, going down and walking in the studio and saying, hey, can we see what you're doing here? Same thing. It went with somebody somebody else that lived on my dorm floor. The two of us decided we were going to go down to the radio station, and Rod's on the air. So that's the kind of thing, I guess at one time I was a listener and then later turned out to be working there.
100%. I mean, it was when I first started, I was doing, I had one shift, Sunday night, Monday morning, 6 to midnight, and Fats would come on the air at 6, and he would get there, Fats, 20 minutes to, if that,
Oh, I was going to say
20 minutes to the top of the
5:55.
hour. I'm trying to be kind. And, but you talk about making me nervous, because this was a man that I had listened to do the top 30 countdown and doing morning shifts, a guy that I woke up with as a child, as, a high schooler and then college.
Yeah.
And now he's following me. And we've talked about this. Fats is one of the nicest men on the planet.
Oh, he is. He's just a gem. And a few years ago, he reached out to me and we went and had coffee a few times. And then when you come to town, we get together. And it's just always joyful to see him. He is, he loves his Minnesota Twins, so that's not being very good to him this year. But, he likes to sit home and watch baseball every day. And kudos to him. He's retired. I'll tell you what, Fats made the University of Montana basketball what it was. He was the PA announcer there. And back when they were getting 7,500 people a night to watch Grizz basketball. And I still remember this story relayed to me by Greg McDonald. He said, I can't remember who the coach was, but something had happened where Greg ran into the coach, I think at halftime, and the coach looked at him and said, I don't know who that guy is that's the PA announcer, but whoever it is, they're not paying him enough. There was another coach from the Big Sky, because that's what Fats did to the crowd. He turned them on so much. He was amazing.
Yeah. I don't know if there's any video of that, but you and I talking about what Fats could do. It was like you were talking about what a showman Greg was. Fats was every bit on that level, and
Amen.
Just had the place just completely beside themselves. Somebody would come down, like a Ken McKenzie or an Eric Hayes, and throw up a great shot, or throw up, the backdoor alley-oop. And as if that wasn't exciting enough, Fats is out there throwing gas on a fire with this incredible voice and whipping the crowd into an absolute frenzy.
Sure.
It was something to see. And then to know Fats and say, how did you do that? Because he really is a very reserved individual at times.
Absolutely.
Maybe it's not
at the Grizz
Maybe
games.
it's an act.
Yeah.
No, it wasn't.
I've got a couple other KYLT stories that are kind of funny.
Yeah, would love that.
My roommate in college was Larry Cernich. Larry was also from Butte. Larry was working part-time at KYLT at the time as well. He and I were driving down the road, and the radio was on, listening to KYLT, but I kind of wasn't listening. And all of a sudden, Larry says, "Did you hear that?" I said, "No." He said, "Ray just said SPF. I won't say the words, but there's 3 swear words that begin with S, P, and F. They're the first 3 swear words in George Carlin's 7 words you can't say on the radio." And I said, "No way." Well, what had happened is Ray had recorded the news, made a mistake, said, "Oh, SPF," pulled the card out, put a new card in, recorded the news again, grabbed the wrong card, took it in because it was a pre-recorded newscast, gave it to Rod Harcel. Rod pressed play, and that's what Ray said. And that went out over the airwaves and was forever remembered. I believe Bill Schwanke carried that recording around with him for a long time. So, I mean, it was almost like something that had happened in WKRP in Cincinnati.
Oh, my gosh. Yeah.
And
Schwanke's a little bit of an instigator, so I'm not surprised that he had that tape probably in his back pocket for quite a while.
I think so. Another one. I was on KZOQ, and I was doing mornings, gotten off the air, and I was back in the production room. That's where we did our commercials. And I was in the middle of production, and all of a sudden, bang, bang, bang on the door, it's Ray. "Hey, the Missoula County Sheriff's Office just called, and they did a big drug bust out in Clinton. You want to go?" "Do I want to go? Yeah, I want to go see this." So I just dropped everything. I didn't even clean up the production room. And off Ray and I go. And they take us up this mountain road and back into this barn. And it's a big barn with one little man door in it. And they parade us in, and they show us this big marijuana cultivation when marijuana was still illegal in Missoula. And they had all of the media there. And there was this whole second level to this barn full of big weed plants. Down on the main level was the nursery where they were starting the new little plants. And so they brought the plants out. They were all in big buckets, threw them in a pile, and set that pile afire. And we sat and watched it burn. And there were some other members of the media that were pretty whiny about the fact that this good weed was going up in smoke. And the sheriff's office later brought a picture to Ray of Ray and I standing by the pile. They had taken some photos, and you can see us in the background. Well, Ray, being the sweetheart that he was when I was at KPAX, stopped by one day and he had a poster size. He'd had it blown up into a poster size. And
my gosh,
there's Ray and I standing there watching the weed burn out by Clint.
Up in smoke.
Up in smoke it went.
Yeah, that's awesome. You know, you left out a couple of things. We're going to wrap it up here in a second, but I asked you what you were doing in retirement, and you missed a couple of things. So I do want to make sure that I bring this up. And one of them is your quiet down. You're a hell of a grandfather to your grandkids. So we want to say that as well. You are and have always been a tremendous cook, great chef. In fact, I've already told my daughter to leave me one night when I come up next month, because I would imagine something will be on the menu at your place.
Well, absolutely.
Hint, hint. And
what would you like?
You know me, I'll pretty much eat anything, but I do also want to, one of the things that I'm always grateful for, in addition to your friendship, is your relationship with your wife, Deborah. She has been, I think, just a wonderful addition to you and me and your life. And it's funny how things work out, because like you said, you spent 19 years doing the Boppa Dips and a lot of fun and a lot of guy stuff. And then you find this beautiful woman. And I'll let you, talk a little bit about, because you're both from Butte. And I think at some point you knew each other before you
known each other since
started dating as adults.
Grade.
Okay.
We were in the same fourth grade class together at Emerson Elementary, Miss Flanick's fourth grade class. Deb's dad was the general manager of the Safeway store in Butte. I knew her in high school. I knew her brother and her dad, and I played golf together a lot. And she and I went to the prom. And then she went off and got married and had two beautiful sons. And I continued my wary ways out, like you said, guy stuff. One day, in front of Electronic Sound and Percussion, I had stopped there after work and was in the store visiting with Dave and Checkers and an old guitar player named Raleigh McNeil. Raleigh was one of the best jazz players, just fabulous. And I forgot something out in my truck, and I said, let me run out to my truck and get it. Can't remember what it was, but I stepped out the door and I heard, hey there. Turn around and it was Deb. And I'd seen her periodically throughout the years, and we talked and said, what are you doing? She said, I'm out on my evening walk. And I said, well, geez, I'd like to maybe start walking one of these days. I should do that for my health. Well, the next day, an email pops up at KPAX. It says, hey, good to see you last night if you want to join me on walks. And so the first night we were supposed to meet for a walk. We were supposed to meet at the depot. Well, she meant the depot restaurant, and I thought it was the train depot. So I sit down there, and she doesn't show. So next day I send her an email, said, hey, waited for you, didn't show. Well, I was there and you weren't there. Okay, so let's try it again tonight. So it was the first night. Actually, I did before I sent her an email. I was driving across the Higgins Bridge, and there she was walking. So then the next day I said, well, let's meet again. So I'm standing down there at the end of the train station, no Deb. Finally, I look, and here she comes walking around the corner off of Spruce or Alder Street. I think it was Alder Street, turning onto Higgins. And hey. So we started walking, and we were friends, and that was it. I mean, we were buds for quite a while, and then things kind of moved along, and we began dating. And, that was 20-some years ago, and the rest is history. So got two great grandkids that live in Butte, two great stepsons, future stepdaughter-in-law, if you will, who we spent time with. Deb's son Kyle, his fiancee Mackenzie, and her parents went to Joe Bonamassa last weekend in Spokane. Yeah, went to a great concert.
Yeah, you seem to get out quite a bit still. I mean, I'm always impressed that you get out to some of the concerts that you do, not only in Missoula, but I know you've gone to Vegas and continuing to live a very vibrant life. So well done.
Well, do the best I can.
Yep. Yes, sir. And some great memories. Keith, I thank you for your time. If you have my phone number, you can call me tomorrow on my way to work.
I think I might do that.
I would love that. And Keith Koprivica, thank you for the great memories and the time you've spent with us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for this opportunity, and truly thanks for doing this for the community of Missoula. Right on.